There's a moment in every gardener or homesteader's journey when you stumble onto something that feels almost too simple to be real. Oh, and before I jump in, make sure you subscribe to Farm Logic so you never miss the forgotten agricultural methods that still outperform modern shortcuts. Now, for the next minute, just stay with me, because what started as a small experiment with spoiled grain turned into one of the most impressive soil transformations I've witnessed. This wasn't compost. It wasn't fertilizer. It wasn't even a microbial booster. It was grain, rotten, sour-smelling grain that had no business being anywhere near a garden. Yet after burying it and letting nature take over, I was left with soil that looked, smelled and behaved unlike anything in the surrounding beds. And the deeper I dug into the historical records, the more I realized this wasn't new at all. Ancient farmers from Europe to East Asia had used rotten grain as a biological catalyst long before the word compost became common language. The story begins with understanding what rotten grain really becomes once buried. On the surface, spoiled grain seems like a waste product, starchy mush invaded by mold and bacteria. But when placed underground, that same fungus-bacteria complex becomes a soil engine. Early agricultural societies knew this intuitively. Grain was too valuable to waste, so any that rotted accidentally became fodder for soil restoration. When I first buried mine, I wasn't expecting much. The grain was clumped together in a foul-smelling mass, and I dug a shallow trench at the edge of a vegetable bed to dispose of it discreetly. I covered it with about 4 inches of soil and debris, tamped it lightly, and walked away. What I'd discovered weeks later shocked me. The transformation happens because rotten grain triggers a microbial bloom, unlike typical compost. Grain is dense in carbohydrates and proteins, and when it breaks down, microorganisms explode in numbers. But the magic lies in the fact that the grain itself breaks apart slowly, feeding soil life steadily rather than all at once. This steady release of food creates a hotspot of fungal hyphae, beneficial bacteria, protozoa, and even small soil invertebrates. It becomes, in effect, a biological reactor. Modern soil science calls this a carbon-nitrogen pulse, but historically it was simply known as grain burial, used by farmers who couldn't waste material yet understood soil health better than many do today. One of the biggest surprises was the physical change in the soil. After about 3 weeks, the soil where I buried the grain felt softer, almost buoyant compared to the surrounding ground. It held water better, yet drained properly after heavy rain. Its colour deepened into a rich, dark brown, and the texture reminded me of woodland earth rather than garden clay. Plants in the immediate area responded dramatically. Their foliage was greener, their stems sturdier, and new growth pushed faster than in the untouched soil. This, aligns with old farming records, where grain burial beds consistently outperformed others, particularly in regions with depleted soil or high-demand crops like beans and brassicas. To apply this method today, the process is straightforward and flexible. Start with any grain that has spoiled: cornmeal, wheat, oats, barley, rye, or even animal feed that has gone rancid. You really do not need large quantities. Just a few cups per square metre are enough. Dig a shallow trench about 2 to 4 inches deep. Place the grain in loose handfuls rather than solid clumps and cover it lightly with soil. The covering depth matters because rotten grain buried too deeply lacks oxygen and may slow down biologically. A shallow burial allows fungal threads to expand outward quickly and encourages earthworms to migrate toward the nutrient-rich patch. Within weeks, the soil begins to shift in structure and smell, replacing sourness with the clean, earthy scent that signals healthy microbial activity. You know, this method becomes even more powerful when combined with leaf litter or straw. Historical accounts show farmers layering grain with carbon-rich materials to moderate its breakdown and prevent nutrient surges that could burn tender roots. When I tested this variation myself, layering rotten oats with a mat of shredded leaves before covering everything with soil, the improvement was even more pronounced. The fungal network became denser, the soil developed clumps known as aggregates, and the water retention increased noticeably. This actually mirrors ancient Korean and Japanese practices where fermented grains, rice hulls and leaves created fertile garden mounds capable of supporting demanding vegetables throughout entire seasons. Rotten grain also has long-lasting effects that surpass many modern soil amendments. Traditional fertilizers wash away easily. Compost, while excellent, breaks down gradually and sometimes inconsistently. Rotten grain, once decomposed, leaves behind stable organic matter and a thriving biological community that supports nutrient cycling for months. In my case, the bed that received the grain treatment, well, it actually remained more fertile well into the following season without any additional amendments. Old European records refer to grain burial as a memory amendment, something the soil remembers and continues to benefit from long after the material is gone. Perhaps the most remarkable part of this method is, honestly, its accessibility and resilience. You don't need equipment, compost bins, aerators, or even store-bought inputs. Rotten grain is a resource, you know, that many people just throw away. But when it's buried correctly, it becomes an accelerator for soil life, a restorer of texture, and a stimulant for root development. Even gardeners with compacted or poor soil can use this technique to quickly build fertility in small patches, turning dead zones into productive growing areas. In survival scenarios or low-tech homesteading, this method is truly invaluable because it converts a so-called waste product into long-term soil health with minimal effort. If you found this guide useful, make sure you subscribe to Farm Logic and, share this video with someone who loves exploring practical agricultural wisdom from history. The old methods persist for a reason. They work, they endure, and, well, they continue to outperform many of our modern shortcuts.